going to have to work your way through it. You're going to have to work your way from scratch. So if you've got an idea on taking over the city's trash system, or renting chairs at lawn concerts in New York, start with something. Show me what happened, right? Show me what's going on as a result of that. Don't come to me expecting any answers.
This can't be it. There has to be more. Wait, am I crazy? No. If you're yearning for more and working hard to make your dreams a reality, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Dream Catchers. It's the only show committed to helping you self-actualize and then transcend, leaving you with the legacy you've always desired. Listen in on conversations with successful philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and founders every week as we connect with them for inspiration, education, and direction. Your host, Jerome Myers, is here to help you exit the matrix and transform into a leader of your own revolution. The question is, do you believe your dreams should be real? Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and you're in for a treat. We flew out to the West Coast. We got my man, Neal Mody, in, I feel like it's Seattle, Washington, but it might be a small city outside. How are you, Neal? How are things out there?
Good. It's Neal Mody, by the way.
Mody. I put the extra O in. I put the extra O in. I failed English. Went to engineering school. Mody. There's not two O's, man. There's one O. Sorry about that.
No trouble. We're coming to you from Bellevue, Washington today, which is an interesting city that probably had a bunch of success because of ex-Microsoft employees. Microsoft made like 10,000 millionaires, and I think like half of them helped build this city at some point. So it's a really kind of fun place to sit. And I live halfway between Amazon and Microsoft, roughly, if you look at it geographically.
Wow. Bellevue. How far is that from Seattle?
25 minutes.
Okay. We're outside of Seattle.
I mean, to like Seattle proper, we're probably like the beginning of Seattle, 16, 18 minutes, and then 25 to downtown.
Got it. So we got the geography figured out, and the people are like, okay, so he messed up his name. Does he really know this guy?
It's right? Okay. Jerome and I are connected deeply. It's totally okay. You can call me whatever you want.
Who's this guy? Look, Neal has the wildest story, y'all. And so, look, before we get too deep, we do things unconventional here. How can the listeners get in contact with you? Because when they hear about this journey, they're going to be clamoring for an opportunity to spend some time with you.
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. It's probably one of the very best ways. Add me there, Neal Mody, and we'll put this in the show notes. And I think I'm already connected to Jerome. Also, you can find me on my website at zoiccapital.com. That's where I invest in life sciences. And I'm sure there'll be more websites in short order.
There we go. Okay. So if I had to put a label on you, I call it serial entrepreneur, right? And you do it at a level I haven't seen many people do it. And so when people hear that, they're like, yeah, what does that mean? Like, is that $100K a year? Is that $50,000 a year like most entrepreneurs? No, ladies and gentlemen. This guy's done it, and he's done it big. So tell me, you weren't always an entrepreneur. You started out with jobs, and then you did some sales stuff. Kind of give us the progression from leaving school through kind of your career, so they get the framework and have some
So
background.
Much to the chagrin of my Indian parents, at the time I dropped out of school, 80% of the Indians in this country had a secondary degree. My sister had graduated number 2 in law school, and I went in and I said, I'm going to drop out. And they're like, huh? What's going on? I think it was the second saddest I've ever seen my dad, right? Like the first being his mother dying. His father died before, when I was really, really young, so I don't remember it. But like literally that was kind of like pin drop silence in that house for a number of days, right? Maybe weeks. And I said, hey, I'm going to open a cell phone store. Even more like, huh? Why? And yeah, I had been the #1 salesman in the country at CompUSA while I was going to college. I started out in community college, then I went to ASU, and then I said, this really isn't for me. Maybe to go back again, I might get a degree in economics and psychology. Those are kind of the things I think a lot about just based on what I do. So I decided I was going to start the cell phone store after working at a friend's shop for 60 days to be helpful. And suddenly I made a sale to a local Walmart store. They had pagers for their deaf employees. And it made it so it's much easier to work with these guys, and they became like super efficient folks, right? They just needed instruction. You don't need to give a lot, just a little instruction. And I said, I bought myself a new watch, and I said, it's time for me to start my own business. Literally, that's what I said after I put the watch on. That was the first thing I thought. It wasn't actually, what a cool watch. So decided to start my own cell phone store. Had no idea what I was doing. And it was a really interesting moment. The market had just gone down for renting commercial real estate in Arizona, and I was able to negotiate a much better lease. Somebody else, went out. I bought all of their display stuff. And so some of, I guess, the lesson that I hope you take away from some of this is buy at the right price, whatever that means for you. Buying at the right price isn't necessarily just a transaction. It's a moment in time for the market. It's definitely a better deal than other people could get. Sometimes that's through your own effort. Sometimes that's not. Sometimes that's through a combination of other factors and environmental, external factors. But you've got to be on the lookout and be discerning for it. So grossed $1 million my first year, expanded way too quickly. And from there, opened 2 stores. And I didn't understand basics about planning. And shortly after I opened one of the stores that was right off the freeway closed for construction to expand it. And so my traffic dried up overnight. Anyway, I sold all 3 of the stores. And I'd realized that my happiest customers were real estate investors at the time. And this is like 2003. So of course you're going through a good cycle. This is before the cycle pops. And I said, I can do that. I can do this. So, sold my first company, had my first exit, if you will, sold my first company. And then I went and the next guy who walked in my cell phone store who had something interesting to say about real estate, I said, hey, I want to come do this with you. And I became his 50-50 partner. We invested in about 20 fix and flips and residential houses under 350,000 at the time in Phoenix, Arizona, Phoenix Metro, Maricopa County. And I learned a lot about what it took to fix things too. So through the cell phone stores, I'd learned about distribution and hiring and advertising. Through the real estate, I learned a little bit about deal making. We hit 2005, we sat out of the market. We ignored all of our criteria that we'd built over a number of years. I think we started investing in right around 2005, and everything fell in Phoenix. It fell across the country, but it was harder hit there. And we looked at one of the properties we'd sold for like 160K that we'd bought for 130K, and it needed like 5K worth of work, and we were out of it. Right, it was pretty easy. It had gone as high as 215 through 4 more buyers, and it had sold at the bottom at 40. Now, the one thing I didn't think about was that the house couldn't have been built for 40, right? The dirt alone was probably worth 40. And, I exited on that house. I think I ended up losing like 30K, and I did that on a few different deals when I really should have just held them. I saw the market was going up, sold at the wrong time. Very common mistake for early investors. I was no different, right? Kind of not learning from historic patterns. And so, I kind of think today a little bit more about buy and hold and buy and build some long-term value, because I was doing the work. Now it's about value capture. The worst thing, as a friend of mine says, is being right and not being able to make money on it. Right? A very good friend of mine says this. So from there, of course, natural transition from being into real estate investment. I bought some lots and some land and some lease back to builders, and did a couple different kinds of deals there. Commercial building with a double close. I owned a discoteca for 5 minutes at one point before the recorder collected it. Just a commercial building. Of course, the next thing you do from that in your career is you start a high temperature superconductor company when you're a college dropout, right? Who had to pass fail physics. One of the things I guess I learned a long time ago, and I think we've talked a little bit about this, Jerome, over time, is I really learned to follow my instincts. And so I met this guy who had an idea, and I thought he was right. And I really didn't know anything about anything related to it. Heck, I'd never heard the word superconductor. It wasn't like the only relation I had to superconductor at the time was the hoverboard from Back to the Future. But even that I didn't know was a superconductor for the mechanism of action. So went into a field I knew nothing about, grew this company, got to 80 employees, a bunch of contractors, raised 22 million. And along the way, we filed a couple thousand patents as well. Patent claims, not patents. The body count of a patent matters more than just the individual patent. Like how many unique ideas are there and how many dependent ideas on some other idea that you're just having a derivative off of matter. So I took that company to a fairly good value. It's still growing today. It's run by a former mentor of mine. And I'm pretty excited about the work they've been able to do and hopefully, and just a little bit about superconductors, but hopefully being able to make them ubiquitous. It's considered, high temperature superconductors are considered one of the 3 holy grails of science. And being able to reduce the resistance from point A to B down to 0 makes it so you can move electricity much more inexpensively. You might remember this from physics, you may not, doesn't really matter. I didn't know any of it. Still, you're ahead of me, even at this moment from when I started my journey there. And so like big place that we all know, heat, friction, and vibration exist in power consumption is our computers. They heat up, we need fans for them. But imagine we could get that to 0. You could change the architecture, you could do all sorts of different things. The other place we know superconductors from is MRIs. An MRI takes an entire room just to be able to get a superconducting magnet cool enough to be able to work. So they only work at kind of extreme temperatures. Getting them to work at normal temperatures will allow for a real hoverboard and a desktop MRI. Hey, I hurt myself playing basketball. Let me get on and order the Uber for MRI. They come the next day or that day. The images go to your doctor, your teledoc doctor. You say, hey, what's going on? We're really close to that world. I invest in that new world as well. And it's not as far out as when I first started thinking about it. So from being a high temperature superconductor, a material science entrepreneur, decided to start a venture capital fund. I was really shocked that GE and Siemens weren't banging on our door to write us checks. Forget valuation. They weren't willing to they took a meeting kind of, I think, out of obligation, because they knew we were somebody, or somebody knew the VC arms of both these people. But we had a chance to change the way MRIs, which is a big piece of, a business unit of theirs, completely existed and nobody was funding us. And so I learned that you've got all these really interesting medical devices out in the world that have had all sorts of research. And these guys, there's not that many people funding them. So I said, that's got to be what I take on next. So there you go. I started a fund. Didn't know anything about anything again. In a niche of niches. And said, okay, I need to learn about this. Spent years building deal flow. I said, in order to write a check in this field, I had to see 500 deals a year. And then I could start writing my first checks, right? So to just give you an idea, between Canada and the United States, there might be, we'll call it 6,000 deals done a year. That's even just ones that are 25K a piece getting checks. So if we say, we'll call it real deals, I'll say that's probably about 3,000, maybe 4,000. Hard to
want to see all of them.
All of it. And I want to see the best ones. I'm more particular about what I want to see today. I want to meet entrepreneurs who have exited before, who don't really know how to raise their seed round per se, or have spent 10 years in the field and know how to leapfrog the current field and have a 10x better innovation. and their innovation can do more than one thing. So actually, I don't want to see more. I want to see the right deals. And took a long time, and seeing a lot of deals and sitting through a lot of conversations and pitches for a number of years to get to that place. We've invested just shy of 10 million in 8 deals. We've invested 15 times. Our average check today is between 500K and $1 million to a startup. We like to see 2 to 3 million going into that round, depending on the dynamics. And they typically have relationships with strategic acquirers like a GE and a Siemens and a LabCorp and that kind of stuff, or we're not interested. So we've got this pretty big criteria, because I was pretty risk adverse. You describe me as a serial entrepreneur, Jerome, but I've had this investor mindset for a long time, even though I'm a value add operator. And how much can I reduce this risk? Could I just see the best 5 deals a year? Last year we saw 2,000. This year I imagine it's about the same number. Maybe it's a little shy of that. Next year I'm sure it'll be the same number again. And we're at this place where we're writing maybe 4 or 5 checks a year, right? Really discerning.
Wow, the percentages is just mind blowing that actually get funded. So,
well, it's not just that they're the best; it's that I've really reduced the risk. Everybody thinks, all my friends, especially my wife works at Microsoft. All my friends in Seattle really think I must be really risky, and I'm like, no, I've got to reduce as much risk as I possibly can. I can't claim this. So I'm not claiming it, but this is what I think internally. This could be one of the safest investment classes that exist. Now, there's still going to be failures. It's a startup, but there's a lot of research into everything we touch before we ever touch it, right? And it's ready to now be technology.
So, I think there's a lot of misinformation about what a startup is that's able to get some capital, get a check written into it. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I met people who say, I got this great idea, and they think they're going to get somebody to give them money.
Oh, no, I was hearing your analogy the other day I've decided I'm going to fight. I've never fought before. I'm going to go fight. I'm going to go fight Conor McGregor, right? I've got no training. Can you write me a check for 500K? I haven't spent much time thinking about this. I don't see those. Companies like that, companies that have a chance to have just a really good idea, test it a little bit with a SaaS model, are in tech, right? And there's tons of funds. Literally, I saw this stat, this must be 6-7 years old, 3,000 funds in the United States, around 3,000 funds, don't hold me to it. 2,950 of them investing in tech and 50 of them investing in life sciences. Right? And so my thought was like, yeah, we can have, this isn't true. And I use lots of tech. Let me be really clear. But I thought to myself, yeah, great. We can have another more efficient way to buy tennis shoes, or we can save somebody's life. That was the joke that was going on in my mind at the same time. And I've learned a lot from my tech counterparts, but I think that their job's much tougher because there's so much competition and your ideas are boom or bust, versus in med tech, your ideas potentially have the chance to have some value even if they bust, because there's such rich research behind it. But like the most important parts, if you're going to go for funding, you need to know everything there is to know about that market, right? Before you go for funding. That's super important. Tons of research. Everything's a weird hyperbolic statement. You've got to know more than most of the folks in the field, and you've got to be able to talk intelligently with the top 2% of the field, right? And then you've got to be really well planned out. When you take somebody's money, it's no longer just your company. So imagine you just, sold a piece, even for like $100 to your neighbor of your company, right? Your neighbor says, here, I'll just give you $100. You see him and he says, how's our company? And you're like, what? I'm the one working on it. But that's a little like what it's like. And so before you want to bring in more sophisticated amounts of money beyond $100, you really need to think about how you're going to spend it, understand what issues you're going to have in scaling it out, right? And what it's actually going to take to be able to go sell that company someday. Because very few companies actually go public in this world. I'm not against investing companies that go public. In fact, I think a couple of ours in our portfolio could, in spite of where the market is and the fact that we're, in a bear market, whether or not people are talking about it. I find it funny nobody really talks about this. So bad stuff happens.
Inflation. That's all we talk about.
It's a bear. let's call it bird a bird.
So you want to know what you have from a market standpoint and be able to talk the talk with the people who can talk the talk. What else is there?
You need to be you're going to have like 3 kinds of folks diligence you if you're going to do well. One of them's going to be like what I like to describe as a CFO archetype. CFO archetype wants to go see everything, every page of everything, wants to figure out how to build maybe a system and that to capture everything you're doing to understand it all. And so they're a person who's probably been an operator somewhere, has worked on some deals somewhere or been part of a sale somewhere, and they're going to potentially help one of their friends or be an investor themselves. So I'm going to call them the CFO archetype for one. Another one, you're going to have an entrepreneur who really had a lot of vision for something and see something in you and is betting on you for the vision, right? But even that person's going to hire a CFO type or somebody who's 50% of a CFO type. So you really have to be well thought out. But even if that person's willing to write a check, they're probably going to do a little digging to make sure what you say is true, depending on the check size, their net worth, and who you are, right? And then I think third is somebody who's kind of like an armchair person, right? Who really doesn't know much about the field, who's had some success either through their family or through working at a cool big company like Microsoft or Amazon. And they have a lot of intelligence about things, and so they think logic alone will be able to get them to the problem. And if you're getting a lot of your ideas from these folks in a field, it means you really don't know your field that well. These folks are good at phenomenal logic patterns, but like anything, you need time to study. You can't expect to go fight Conor McGregor on day one. You want those guys. I have some of my best investors are tech and folks who made money in tech, executives at insurance companies, that kind of thing. And they can add a ton of value, but you've got to know where to point people to help you think about things, right? You're not going to get their neurons on a problem that you're actually excited about until you know what the hardest things are to worry about.
Okay. So
that's a lot. How's that? Too much to digest, maybe, but there you go.
No, I'm processing it because I think you got to know who you're talking to. So you have to know your space. You got to know the people who are going to come look at the thing that you've been working on and how to package the information so that those people can receive it. But let's go a layer deeper. Like, when do you actually have a company that's fundable?
So I think you have to have proof. For me, one more thing I didn't add is I want to see clinical data. If you're at a tech company or whether you're starting, a ditch digging business, like, how do we know that it works? Tell us about that. Because if you want to move beyond the $100 from your neighbor, who's going to ask you a lot of questions anyway, right?
All checks ask the most questions.
Right. You need to have validation. So if you don't have validation, you can't get validation. I'm not sure what to tell you. Like, this is the table stakes to start the conversation. You're going to have to work your way through it. You're going to have to work your way from scratch. So if you've got an idea on taking over the city's trash system or renting chairs at lawn concerts in New York, start with something. Show me what happened, right? Show me what's going on as a result of that. Don't come to me expecting any answers. Don't go to any investor and that doesn't apply to me as much because I'm talking to an average of a PhD or somebody who's just studied so much in a field or been in a field for so long that doesn't happen. But this is just for the general audience.
A lot of people want to unlock their ultimate potential but lack the strategy, support, and stamina necessary to achieve their major goals. They often try to overcome these challenges by trying to do it on their own, causing frustration, fatigue, and eventually failure. We have developed a model for a center life, aka the red pill, to help them bolster their beliefs, gain clarity on their path to success, and provide accountability as they take action on their goals. When they take the red pill, they rapidly accelerate attainment of their goals and begin to experience a life of significance and impact. Want to find out more? Hop over to jeromemyers.co. Now, let's get back to the episode. This part's really where I want to hone in because I think most people feel like I've got an idea and now I need somebody to give me a check so I can get the validation. And you're saying, hold your horses. You need to get the validation before you ask for a check.
That's table stakes for asking for a check, typically. You got to prove something somewhere. Yeah.
And so data collection.
Ideas only worth 2%. The execution's where it's at. They're phenomenal as ideas out there. Every good idea you and I could put together on a board, there's a group who could come up with better ideas after a course of the same amount of time. So the ideas were something. I don't want to dismiss that at all, but it's really in the execution of it. And how do you prove that you're going to execute that? You've got to give them some proof that your idea works. Otherwise, you're just an idea generation machine.
Well, I think generating the ideas was easy, right? I mean,
it's the execution of that. I mean, you play a coach, right? For one of the hats you wear, you play an investor for one of the hats you wear. You've got to see, for you to want to work with people, for you to want to invest in them, if you want to invest in projects, you're all about that validation, actually. We can do the work together, but if you go home and do nothing, don't call me, right? Like, that was great for a first call. Thanks for sending the check. I can't
help if there's no implementation. So, all right. Can you tell us about a company where you made an investment and you were like, this is brilliant, and then it worked out as you expected? And then I want to hear a story of when it didn't work out, because the check doesn't get written until you believe in the outcome, right? So do you have two examples, or have you only had winners?
Yeah, so most of the stuff I've invested is doing well, really well. Some of it's doing well, some of it's doing good, and the rest of it's doing great. And it tends to be more on the great side for the stuff I've invested. But again, part of that's because I have so much criteria, right? Like, one of the group of guys we invested in sold 10 companies for 15 billion cumulatively, right? I think it's a much higher number. I think there's maybe 12 or 15 companies for 20 billion. But the point is, these guys know what they're doing. I like to add value, whether it's talking about a license or IP or cap tables. But I like to say all these entrepreneurs would be just fine if we all went off a cliff in a bus. Our portfolio would be just fine. And that's one of my comforts in investing in the companies I invest in. So a good story. I met a company in San Diego, California, who contacted one of my partners at the time and said, hey, we've got this idea that we can diagnose near anything from a couple drops of blood. Like, okay, we've heard this story, right? It's called Theranos. It didn't work out well. But these guys had sold their last company to LabCorp, a public company, and they were back at it again. They said, hey, we've got an idea of how to leapfrog things, and we really know this prenatal diagnostics market. So, and we have a little data, and we put in money of our own. So we went on to be the first investor in this company called Juno Diagnostics, and their first test is actually a prenatal diagnostic test for gender at 5 weeks, and it's 95% accurate. So to give you an idea, a sonogram at 12 weeks is 75% accurate on the gender. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, gender reveal parties are on the rise. People really are excited these days and want to celebrate even more. And then there's also major issues with abortion in different states. And so this is actually even more important to know, potentially for some families, what's going on. The other thing this test can do that they do is that, there's 5 different kinds of common tests that everybody who's pregnant ends up getting: karyotyping, Down syndrome, that kind of stuff. And when you're done taking a couple drops of blood and getting the information on your phone, because it literally is done at home, you don't have to go to a doctor, you just buy it over the counter. There's no FDA approval needed for gender, because it's not a diagnostic, right? It's just you're telling somebody what it is. You drop it in the mail, and a few days later, they'll give you information on the rest of these tests at their CLIA lab in San Diego. So they launched in San Diego recently. I invested in the company in 2018. They just launched their first product. They're doing their first market launch, and then they'll be going nationwide in short order. We invested at a pretty low value, and I think the next round will be over 100 million valuation. Most of the stuff we invest in is sub 15 million valuation. So I like to see some
on the low end. It sounds like
I'm feeling pretty good. And management continues to execute. Not to say they haven't had their bumps, which is fine, but they continue to execute. They do really, really well. They have an idea. They spend a lot of time planning, and then they spend lots of time executing on it. And it's very obvious. The company grew from the 4 founders to I think they're just shy of 50 employees now. So it's also like gratifying to see that part too.
So like when you write a check into a company, what type of things do you feel are good uses of that capital?
So they're coming to me probably in my field because they want to have more validation, clinical validation. They want to have more patient data to say that it works. And so there are 2 good uses I want to see: more testing, so that more people are interested in the product, and that ends up being a big percentage of it. And a lot of people think they know a lot about IP, but don't really have a cohesive strategy. And this is probably like even a lot of real estate investors, right? I flipped houses. I'm flipping a house right now, but like, could I know everything, even though it's a much simpler problem than a life science company? No.
Never.
What?
As soon as you open a wall, you welcome to a brand new world.
Yeah. And it involves another wall. You're going to run into it again. So I think that's the important thing to remember: is you just can't know everything. You got to try and constrain the places where things can go wrong, and build that into what the plan is on where to go, right? So typically they already know what they want to spend the money on, and I typically say, okay, raise a little more, because maybe you need some extra runway after that's done, or have you thought about how the next round works, or that kind of thing. So maybe making sure that the places that they have some blind spots, or just haven't put the neuron time, maybe they actually know, but they haven't really given it so much thought, having those conversations and making sure the plan matches that.
That was really not what I expected you to say, because it's almost like I was expecting you to say, ooh, marketing, or ooh, blah, 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 blah. And you're saying, no, we're going to continue to validate the experiment that they had to get more information, because that makes us smarter, instead of market related conversation.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not really much market relation in the beginning. It's just a lot of validation, because then you're ready to go to the market. And before I invest, there's plenty of validation for me, just that the proof point that somebody needs is different, right?
So this is really making, if you think about this as a widget, you're helping them do experiments on the widget with the capital that you put into their company, so that the widget...
No, experiment to develop it further. Think about, actually, my wife was cleaning out a drawer in her closet, and she found an iPhone 1. Right? Yeah, and it was really interesting to see the iPhone 1, right? And see how cool it was to technology, but how different it is than the iPhone 13 that I hold in my hand still. And I'm saying, look, between generation 1 and 13, there's a lot of different things that will change. And this is a commercial product. How many variations did they have before it got to 1? Right? And so before you go to different people, it's not really about proving it. It works already. that's part of it. But how much of it are you ready to go show into a product like that, right? And that's maybe just an easy way for people to, if you can't picture the iPhone 1 to 13, picture your TV when you were a kid, assuming you're over 25 or 30, right? The cathode TV versus the flat screen TV we have. We had a 57-inch TV at one point when I was 18, right? And it just took so much room. It was crazy. Now just, it's like a big poster on a wall, right?
Yeah.
The
So
generation jumps. You've got to figure that stuff out for industry to be really interested in what you're up to.
for commercial adoption, there's got to be a
For
focus.
commercial adoption, because it's about efficiency. A lot of people who purchase you've got to understand a little bit about what's the driver of purchasing. So if BlackRock is purchasing something, that's because they can borrow at 1% effectively, despite what the interest rate is, right? So they just need to continue to buy more and more and more revenue. That's the game, right? For BlackRock. Now, if a company is buying you and they're public, or they're about to go public, they're trying to buy you for the multiples on revenue they can get. So if they're trading at 13 times, whatever the revenue is, and you're saying, hey, here's where it'll get, they're saying, okay, we can finance this deal. We can put it in, and just for buying it, we go up in revenue, which is better for our total valuation, our market cap. Understanding that helps you figure out where you need to start, right? And the entrepreneurs I talk to in general and spend beyond 1 minute with have a really phenomenal, not clue. They're teaching me. They're masters in their domains lots of the time.
I thought it was interesting that you talked about the guy's track record, and you said basically he sold 15 or 20 companies and in the billions. And so that person made investing in the company.
There's a group of 3 people. 2 of them had done that a lot, but sorry, continue.
But that team made it a no-brainer, right? The operational experience.
No, it was also their innovation. Their innovation was 10x better than anything that ever been seen in the field before. I don't know if the company's talking too much about it, but like a small preview of it is they found a way to solve issues like venous leg ulcers, which have never been solvable before, and lots of people have tried to solve. So it's a simple piece of hardware that goes in and can be done an outpatient procedure. So all these people who are bleeding out or having amputations or having lots of issues, it's not such a big issue anymore.
Wow.
It'll get there. They need to scale it a little more, but that's where they're headed.
So you talked about all of the funds that are in tech and they're looking for the next innovation and how that compares to kind of med tech or life sciences. Is the multiple different? Like, is the multiple in life science?
Yeah, you're not likely to see as many billion-dollar companies come out of non-biotech in biology. So the multiple is totally different. And then lots of companies are willing to pick up IP that's valuable to a product line they already have. So that's also potentially different. I see like tech companies, you typically either have like massive success or massive failure. There's very little in between. And so to some degree, I'll just tell you right now, Sequoia, unless they think that somebody else wants to buy it, probably doesn't care if you can get to 2 or 3 million in revenue. And Sequoia famously backed like YouTube, the second most visited site ever, and Google, the first visited site ever, right? They were early investors, and they were very early investors in YouTube and part of the Series A for Google. They want to invest in stuff that has a chance to be that ubiquitous, right?
Unicorns.
And forget unicorn. Just like when they invested in YouTube and when they sold YouTube, I don't think they got to unicorn value. It's, do you have a chance to be really ubiquitous in helping people figure things out? And the fact that my dad's using YouTube today, and he was saying a good friend of his who's in his mid-80s is using YouTube, like that's phenomenal. That's a testament to success of that technology.
So there, when you say ubiquitous, you mean mass adoption changing the way that people interact and
Right.
engage in the world.
Yeah, and the stuff I'm looking at is typically in a smaller, it's a niche of a niche. So it's in healthcare and it's a way you measure something that changes things. But I think it's the way that everything could be changed. Just as smallpox isn't such an issue in this country anymore, or it's not an issue in this country at all anymore, and worldwide there's very few cases ever reported. Um, that's the I want to invest in stuff that will help lead to outcomes like that, right? That will eradicate the COVIDs of tomorrow. And COVID can be a political topic, so I'm not trying to say yay or nay. Though I, believe in vaccines, I just want to be clear about that. And I helped start an RNA company in my spare time, a COVID vaccine company. And the first COVID vaccine approved in India is a license from a company I helped start. So I'm saying all of that to say that you want to be pretty thoughtful about where you're going to go with not just the spend, but the mistakes you're going to make along the way, and how you're going to view the next big step of your purchase or your sale of another company, so that you can ultimately lead to a sale, or the adoption of your company product, so that you can make those major changes in the world.
Huh. So most people are probably scratching their head and saying, my idea isn't that big. Does that mean that I'll never be able to get funding?
No. If your idea is really cool and can help people, whatever it is, even if you're mowing lawns and you're trying to sell part of that business, you're potentially fundable. Not necessarily by a big VC, but somebody else will take notice if you get to 500 lawns, meaning it's not just you anymore, right? And you're doing it on a monthly basis. Somebody's willing to write you a check to help you get to 5,000 lawns, right? And you want to talk to them before you get to 500. You want to start to think about that. You want to talk to them when you're at 50, saying, "Hey, I know how to get to 200, and I'm going to call you when I get to 500," right? Because I don't know how to get to 2,000 exactly, but I will by then. Right? And it's not, and I want to get there much quicker than just organically. That's the time to bring in capital. If you can do something organically, probably shouldn't bring capital in. And not everything in this world should be grown inorganically. Let me be really clear about that. Most things shouldn't be. We've got this desire for more now, quicker. Right? It's like, just because I can order a book on Amazon, get it same day now, and soon, in the next few hours, doesn't mean anything, right? Like, if you've got a dream about something, go for it. It doesn't matter whether it's scalable, whether it's fundable. If you've got a dream about something, go work on making it happen. Look for some validation for yourself. What would you need to see? Imagine you were convincing the 75-year-old self of yours to spend the time on that when you were young. Like, what would you need to see to actually care? What would lead to significance for the quality of your life as a result of this success or failure? And both are the same, by the way. Right? Like, if you fail at something, you'll get better at something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I find most interesting about your story, Neal, is you've never been scared to learn. You never felt like you had to be in the traditional system in order to get your education. Where did that come from?
I don't think I knew how to fit in the traditional system. I faced a fair amount of prejudice growing up. I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, and I don't think I ever kind of really fit in. So I never really tried to continue to fit in. I just got used to carving my own path. And so I used all of those experiences as fuel to say, okay, what do I want? Right? Because clearly I can't get the happiness from the things external to me at those moments. And so what do I really want? And why do I want it? And, it's the basics. I want to love myself. I want to love the people next to me. I want to have good relationships, and I want to have some success. And, you make a list of these things, and then you start to understand, okay, well, that's not really about a path. That's just about you. And so now you've got to figure out what you want and where you want to go with that. I have just as much respect for somebody who cleans the dishes at Denny's. That's a tough job. right? And as long as that person has a dream and knows what they want, and that's helping fulfill, and maybe their dream is to send their kid to college or just to pay their rent monthly. If they're there, phenomenal.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful because so many of us look for others to tell us what we should want and what we should do. And you're saying, no, the answer is within. And as long as you're satisfied with whatever the outcome is, then that should be enough. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. If the 12-year-old of you would be impressed and the 75-year-old would be satisfied, you're probably headed the right way.
I love that because I pick with people all the time. Because when I talk about Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff, they're like, "Why do you want that? Like, isn't that just gaudy?" And I'm like, "Well, when I went to the book fair, it was never to go get a Toyota Camry to put on my wall, right? Like the posters on my wall." It was Diablos, it was F40s, it was
This is
a real thing.
we interrupt this podcast to bring you a commercial by Toyota.
It was never about practicality and reliability. That wasn't the answer. It was extravagance and excitement. So, Neal, I always wrap up these podcasts with one question, and you've had so many like zingers in here. I hope you got one more.
Sorry, there's so much to unpack.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good. We're probably gonna have to have you back because I am totally intrigued with getting checks written into startups and what exits mean and so on and so forth. But the question that I have to wrap up this episode is, what's the one thing you want the listeners to take away?
Be yourself and try and understand what that means for you, from you.
I gotta ask, how'd you figure out who yourself was for you?
I think I'm still figuring it out, right? That's part of the human experience. I think it's evolving and changing, and the decade you're in will definitely, the decade you're in, the socioeconomic class you're in, the zip code you have, will determine a lot of what you think related to that. And you still have to figure out what that means for yourself every day, right? And take the time to do it. You've got to set the time aside to understand what that means.
I love that. I love that. I've never identified it or codified it or said it as be yourself. I just remember when I was in this period of discovery and I questioned everything. It was right after I started asking the two magic questions. What was it all for? And is this really it? And what I found was I was programmed, to your point about the zip code, to the point about the house that you live in. I was programmed to believe and see things in a specific way. When I peel back the layers after questioning it all, I realized, wait, these aren't my ideas. These are ideas somebody else gave me. And I don't know that they actually hold true for me. It's a really scary place to be. But if you walk through that, then you have a different understanding of what life is and how you can engage, interact with people, and make it a life worth living. So, Neal, I really appreciate that last little nugget of wisdom. Sir, you're a dream catcher in the truest definition as we define it here. And I'm just so grateful that you're able to be so generous with your time with us today. Thank you so much.
I took the red pill a long time ago. Thanks for having me.
To the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for joining the tribe today. We would love to hear from you. Please don't forget to rate, like, and share. Perhaps someone you know could benefit from what we've discussed. Until the next time, remember that your dreams should be real.